Hello Internet, my name is Lave and I watched It, which is the latest adaptation of Stephen King's novel of the same name, which I haven't read, and I also haven't seen the Tim Curry version as well, aside from a couple of clips. I was obviously aware of it growing up. It did have a pop culture status. I remember my brother and his mates talking about it, but from what I heard, it wasn't a very good adaptation, so I never got round to watching it. It's got nothing to do with the fact that clowns do scare me. Nothing to do with that at all. What I'm trying to say is that I'm not familiar with the source material, so I can't tell you if it's a good adaptation. I can't tell you what's different from the book. And also, I'm not a fan of horror films in general, so I didn't have that great expectations going in to see this. So for those who don't know, it is about a group of socially outcast kids who are part of a gang called the Loser Squad, who are not only dealing with your everyday troubles as a kid, they've got to deal with bullies at school, they've got their own domestic problems at home, they've also got to deal with a demonic clown called Pennywise who's terrorising their little town of Derry, kidnapping and killing kids. Now, I hadn't realised going into this film that it was actually set in the 80s, specifically the summer of 1989, and the film goes more than out of its way to let you know that. There's loads of nods and Easter eggs to films of that era. There's a Gremlins poster in one of the kids' rooms, Batman and Lethal Weapon are playing at their local theatre, and one of the kids is even rocking a databank watch. Now, I had one of those watches at school. They were the iPhones of their day. They were awesome. Not only that, the film itself is structurally and visually and tonally very reminiscent of other films that I did watch growing up, like The Goonies and Stand By Me and A Nightmare on Elm Street. I know I'm not the first person to say that. I'm not going to be the last person to say either, but what it did was just give me a complete wave of nostalgia whilst watching this. And what works really well in this film is the ensemble of kid actors they've got to play the kids in this film. For the most part, they all do a really good job. The Loser Squad is primarily made up of 4 core friends at the beginning of the film, but then as it progresses, more kids join their gang. I think there's about 7 of them in total, and I would argue that it does get a little bit cluttered. Not all of them get equal screen time, but for the most part, it does a really good job of juggling their characters. As I say, each of them all have their own problems, ranging from distant parents to overbearing parents to sexually abusive parents, and it even explains why the bully is a bully. Essentially, it's because he's being bullied as well. It comes across that the makers of this film are completely aware of the cliches and are just completely embracing it. Every character feels really familiar. It feels like they've been modelled on other popular culture characters from other films. For example, there's a character called Beverly who is the spitting image of Molly Ringwald from The Breakfast Club, and indeed many of the other characters really reminded me of characters I've seen in other films. And because of that, I really gravitated towards these characters. Some were a bit annoying at first for sure, but towards the end of the film I was really rooting for them, which is really important. In fact, I would argue that if you were to remove the horror element, if you got rid of Pennywise entirely, this film would still function as an excellent coming of age adventure kids film. But of course, this is a horror film and we've all come to see the latest version of it. This time it's played by Bill Skarsgard, who I thought did a really effective job. He puts his own stamp on Pennywise. He really reminds me of Michael Keaton's Beetlejuice doing an impression of a Scooby-Doo character. I know that doesn't sound like I'm selling it very well, but it is extremely effective. He's a really creepy Pennywise. His performance is assisted by some really subtle CG work which makes his eyes glow and point in different directions. The practical and makeup effects are really good as well. All in all, it's a really effective Pennywise. However, when it comes to the horror aspect of this film, it wasn't quite as scary as I thought or hoped it was going to be. As I say, horror isn't my favourite genre. I do think that if you've seen one, you've seen them all before. They all have a set visual language and a pattern which they all follow, and it definitely follows those patterns to a T. I definitely think it relies too much on jump scares, which I personally could see coming a mile away. So you could say that it doesn't really offer anything new from that aspect, but I will say that it is executed extremely well, and combine that with the fact that I really liked the kids and was rooting for them, I will have to say that is a success. So that's my thoughts on it, and pause the video if you want to take a closer look at my enjoyment tracker now. As I say, horror isn't my favourite genre, and I didn't have any particular attachments to Stephen King's novel or the Tim Curry version, so my expectations weren't great for this, but I surprisingly really enjoyed it. I was really attached to the characters, and like every other horror franchise, it leaves it open for another one, and surprisingly, I would be interested in seeing the next installment. So thanks very much for watching my review of it. I really do appreciate it. If you can, give this video a like, and don't forget to share the Lave. Subscribe.